Things are completely interconnected. So let me, before I turn it over to Ken, I'm just going to introduce our panelists here. I will start with Jennifer. And per her own bio, she's a passionate advocate and social entrepreneur committed to guiding leaders and organizations to create healthier workplace cultures that resonate with current and incoming leaders, which I think is a very nice mission statement. She is, her expertise is on driving innovation and business results. She's widely quoted in the media. A lot of the focus of her work is on diversity and inclusion, obviously, the changing demographics of the workforce, women's career, and the LGBT landscape, which is the lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transgender landscape, just for anybody who might not know. And so she's widely seen on television, and she writes lots of articles as well, and she's been recognized for her work with the Women's President Organization and a number of other very good organizations that she's involved with, including being honored with numerous awards. She was honored by the New York City Comptroller, Bill Thompson, back in 2008 as one of the LGBT Business Owners of the Year, and as one of the Stonewall Community Foundation's top 40 outstanding women in 2009. And she's also been the recipient of a number of scholarships to some very prestigious organizations and universities. So welcome, Dale. And we'd like to also welcome Dale Jones, who, as Ken mentioned, is the brand new, as of October 1st, president of Diversified Search. So welcome in many ways here. He was previously the vice chairman and partner for the CEO and board practice at Heidrick & Struggles International, where he consulted with corporate boards and CEOs of leading institutions on human capital issues, including recruiting, succession planning, corporate governance, compensation, and enterprise risk. He joined Heidrick & Struggles after tenure with another search firm, which he declined to mention, which is perfectly appropriate, I think, given the audience. But he was a managing partner of the firm's Atlanta office, the Heidrick & Struggles office, and he was named managing partner of the CEO and board practice in the Americas in 2007. He's also served as one of the firm's leaders in the education and social enterprise practice. So, again, as with all of our panelists, he's got numerous accolades and recognitions in his industry. He has been the executive director of Quest Atlanta, assistant vice president of the charitable giving at the Bank of America. He's on the board. He's the National Advisory Board Chairman for the Salvation Army, on the board of the directors for Kohl's, and he also holds trustee positions at Northwestern Mutual, Morehouse College, and Princeton Theological Seminary. So I might have skipped a couple of things. If I did, I apologize. But we're very, very happy to have you here today to talk about diversity.
Okay, so I'm like the poster child for the middle-aged white guy who all companies are trying to sort of say, we got plenty of them, right? That's what it looks like, right? So we'll have a discussion today about diversity, what it's going to look like. And diversity means different things in different places. It means a different thing in Latin America than it probably means in the native South where I grew up, and perhaps you grew up too, or no? So it means a different thing to different people, but we're going to talk about that today and what that diversity means. So I thought for the first question I would ask them, and I'll ask you to think about it yourselves. The first question I had is, how will diversity and inclusion conversation be different in 20 years? Where are we now? And what will we be thinking about in 20 years? I don't think it's going to go away, right? There'll still be some discussion of diversity and inclusion in 20 years, but what will it look like in 20 years? So as you think about it, I'll ask them to answer that. Dale.
Well, great question because of how it's changed.
Or 10 years is fine.
In the last 10, how it's changed in the last 10, 20 years. Increased globalization and technology has made the issue of diversity and inclusion a much bigger issue for all of us. So if I'm a retailer in the US and I have a plant in Bangladesh that does sew and cut and sew operations, diversity and inclusion is a big issue for me. If I'm the CEO of Libby Glass, I have a glass factory in Monterrey, Mexico, diversity and inclusion is a big issue for me. When I look at the buying power of people of color, of people with disabilities, the buying power of gay, lesbian, transgender individuals, diversity and inclusion is a big issue because I can monetize the value and the buying power of people groups and interest groups And so more and more corporations will be looking at the issues of diversity and inclusion as a strategic business opportunity, not just a feel-good. This is something we have to do to feel good about each other, but there are strategic business opportunities and there are resources and funds left as low-hanging fruit that don't get utilized. And so I think it's increasingly a bigger issue. One last example, and I'll turn it over to Jennifer. Amway, the big multimedia company of the US for many years that we used to run from people who were doing multi-level marketing, is a multi-billion-dollar business in the US today. They own several sports teams, stadiums, and hotels. 96% of their revenue comes from outside the US. It's a small company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, multi-billion, but their businesses are in India, in Mexico, in parts of Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia, in China. And so Tupperware, similar business, similar scenario. 80% of their revenue
How
comes
many of
from
your
outside.
companies come from 50% of your revenues outside your headquarter country? How many of you crossed the 50% threshold in your companies? Not too many here yet, okay. Microsoft has, Olympus not yet?
Yes.
It has, okay.
So the issue of diversity and inclusion, 20 years, 10 years from now, will reflect the changing business climate and increased globalization of where we get revenue from.
And I piggyback on that. So as the markets shift externally, your organization has to be culturally competent enough in doing business in those markets. So the thinking now is, as you do internally by your talent, is actually visible. We're living in an age of transparency where the walls are coming down because of social media, because of accountability and transparency. And any CEO will tell you this. They're blogging, they're trying to make connections to their workforce. They're trying to be a person to the point of authenticity we've talked about earlier, not just an automaton and a big name. But, and that's part of it. I think it's a tip of the iceberg around this whole transparency thing. So, and I think, communities of color and diverse communities, at least in the US sense, are looking inside the company and saying, well, we will buy from you if we agree with your practices. And it's not just your practices in the community, in the marketplace, in your ecosystem, but it's your practices by your talent, really. And this is where it gets really interesting because, you are all accountable now for what sort of culture you maintain and what people are saying in social media about what it's like to work there. So they become, I see them as your internal customers, really. You're marketing to your employees. You have a brand promise to these employees. And they go out and they tell their friends, and their friends tell their friends. And this is why I live in such an interesting world, because I represent like the LGBT community. I'm an LGBT business owner, right? So I'm a customer, I'm a consumer, I'm a potential recruit for you. I am a reference, I'm an entrepreneur in your supply chain. And I may or may not work for you someday. I may boomerang out and come back in a different capacity. But what I talk about your brand in all of these different areas is really what matters. So it's like a holistic way of looking at your brand reputation. And I think that's going to be very interesting to see because, companies could conceal, to our point about the technologies making something visible, we could conceal a lot in the past. But I think those metrics, like the Twitter board, those metrics and the accountability around it, why is that? Why would that have gone on so long with no one noticing that? That's going to change. There's going to be an accountability. I think it's good because companies need the insights of their internal talent in order to sell credibly to diversifying marketplaces. So you don't need to go and buy fancy consultants, even though I love that income. You've got it right inside your company. You've got a diverse workforce that can be advising you on new products, new solutions, new market strategies, talent strategies for recruitment and retention for their own. How does it feel to be a woman of color trying to grow her career to the executive level of the company? It's a very different experience for them than it has been for what I would call a more traditional talent. So, and those women are also the customers, the buyers, the ones that are talking or not talking or saying good or bad things about what it's like to work for, buy from your company. So I think it's actually great, and it's going to lead to a lot of innovation from unexpected places if we know how to harness it, if we know how to engage that workforce internally, and then if we know how to turn them towards innovation. New product development, and Irby has unbelievable stories about this at Clorox. They've got it completely hardwired into the business with the CEO's sponsorship and support, and their diverse communities are creating new products, new market strategies. They're capitalizing on cultural events, and they're selling like millions of dollars of product. So, and they feel good about it.
The great segue into the next, even our next speaker with Irby, is that diversity inclusion executives and discussions are really going to be around how do we measure the success of the business as it relates to diversity inclusion. It's not a kumbaya feeling, it's about how do we grow markets and how do we understand who our clients and customers are and our employees. And so Irby, who has a background in finance and accounting, is leading an inclusion diversity initiative. I think we're going to see more people who have the analytics around data to support this whole notion of diversity inclusion. If you've not read Scott Page's book, he's a professor at the University of Michigan who's a mathematician and an economist. He writes about differences and he writes about diversity and how diverse teams create a better society and community and company and corporate environment. And he gives the analytics for what most of us who are on the liberal arts side have been talking about, but he gives the analytics about what this all means.
How many have specific programs in Latin America that are related to diversity and inclusion? If you want to share a particular program that you guys put together, what do you have? What do you do?
Well, we have from different sources. I mean, it's been adapted for Latin America. It's a program that has been in place since 2006. We were talking about it this morning. And honestly, I think it made a difference for the company. Especially, I mean, what I'm realizing now, and it's very interesting, is that each country is different.
Right. Yeah, what does it mean for SAP Latin America?
But let me give you a comparison with Germany. In Germany, they made this program because of the huge amount of immigrants that they needed to bring from India and Turkey to work in the company. So the reason why they actually put the program together at that time, 2006, was to manage this cultural change within the German headquarters of all these people coming from outside. But if you see in Latin America, it's been more about sexual preference, for example. And not really about immigrants, because Mexico or Brazil, I mean, there are plenty of immigrants there, and they are well-themed anyway. So you don't need to protect them or help people to understand why they are coming, right? So this is something very interesting, because talking about goals, right, and how you analyze this information, I believe that you really need to make sure that you have a specific action and set of goals for each country. Because diversity is a completely different topic when you're talking Germany or Mexico or Brazil, right? So, and that was, I think, the learning in Latin America, that the program coming from Germany was not really the right one for Mexico.
Because it is different for every country. What's the offbeat question? What's the role of humor in diversity and inclusion? Is there a role for that? Can jokes be very dangerous, obviously, but can they occasionally be helpful? Is there any room for that? You have to be very careful.
This is a tough one. This is a sensitive subject. And I hate to, when I hear PC, I sort of cringe. Because what we're really trying to do is, it's not create an us and them dynamic about diversity like the straight white guys who are 90% of our leadership in Fortune 500 companies at the executive level.
For now.
For now. Thank you. But, so I think there has to be a safe place, and my company does this actually, where we close the door with the executives and the CEO and honestly kind of get the questions asked that people are embarrassed to ask in front of their people, and nor should they be asked in front of their people. I mean, in fact, I do one-on-one coaching with executives because I don't even think they want to admit what they don't know in front of each other. But if they can talk to me as a third party, we can talk through what are their dumb questions around what diversity means, what am I expected to do, and why should I care, and what does this have to do with me? And what's interesting is
Are those some of the dumb questions?
Yeah.
Are there other dumb questions?
Yeah, sure. Like, I mean, some people are very data-driven, and so some leadership teams are saying, what is this going to do for my business? But others really connect into this on a heart level. I've seen CEOs say, I got a daughter, and it came to me one day that I want to lead a company that's going to be good for her to work in someday. So it can be incredibly personal. So whenever we get harassed about ROI, well, what's the ROI? Well, I don't want to do it if I don't, see a yield on the bottom line. And I think, though, that this is as much of a heart conversation and a personal conversation. And one leader, one executive can kind of inform a whole culture. It takes one CEO, and we know some of them who are very passionate advocates. They've learned, I'm sure they've made mistakes, and they've had aha moments around why is this important to build the most competitive workforce that I can get. But they also understand that they personally are a role model, the best ones, the ones that get it. And then they hold their people accountable. So they sit down with their executives and say, okay, I'm measuring you on diversity metrics, which is something that's being done at PepsiCo and other companies, to say, what have you done and how active are you? What kind of impact have you had? And it's not just measuring who's on your team in terms of diversity of demographics, but it's a lot of other kind of to be determined metrics, like, what do they say at town hall meetings? Are they comfortable talking about diversity and how it impacts their organization? Where are they involved in the community organizations? Do they show up at meetings for a diverse employee? They're called employee resource groups. Do they show up? Do they sponsor one of those groups? So do they have a lot of, up and coming diverse leaders in their function? What do those metrics look like that the performance management system can show you? So there's a lot of different ways to kind of get at it, but I think executives are sort of deer in the headlights right now around what is this, what am I supposed to do about it? And I think that we have to help them, we have to explain it. And it's not that hard, by the way. Diversity and inclusion, the inclusion piece, just so you guys know, we hear these a lot together. Think of the diversity as the who and the what, so the demographics. And the experience of background is not just ethnicity, race, gender, it's background, experience, functional diversity, diversity of style, diversity of thought, communications. Introverts and extroverts can be hugely different in how they work and where they get their energy source. Inclusion is the how, so it's the behavior. So if I'm an inclusive leader, I'm somebody that gets up in front of my team and makes others feel welcomed, valued, respected, and heard. And that is a learnable skill. So I could be a straight white guy that's very passionate about inclusion, and I lead that way, and that's my reputation. So, it doesn't, just because you're a diverse person doesn't mean you're a very inclusive leader. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Really, and that was such an aha for me, because I kind of went in thinking, well, if you're a diverse person, you clearly know how to do this better than everybody else. Not necessarily. So I know a lot of straight white guy executives who just are fabulous about it and need more.
Hope for me yet.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think Jennifer's made a great distinction around diversity and inclusion, because if you just spend time on diversity, you just chase demographics. And if you don't think about the inclusion piece, then you've got a revolving door of people who don't feel valued and accepted and can grow in an environment. I spent a number of years working alongside of Steve Reinemund, the CEO of PepsiCo, from 1996 to 2007 when he retired. And he really led the way in his company by creating metrics around hiring, creating metrics around around the inclusive culture of the organization in terms of accepting people with differences. And then behind him, he left a CEO, Indra Nooyi, from India, of different ethnicity, different part of the world, different religion, but also had these wonderful skills that could sort of grow a global business. And so I think it's important that we think about diversity and inclusion from a standpoint of culture with head and heart, of recruiting people, but having an environment in place that will allow people to grow and develop.
I have a question to both of you. I know we're talking about inclusion and what we can do here, but one of the things that has always struck me is that the board of directors at all major corporations are probably the least inclusive of any groups if you talk about business. I think the number of women, I may be off on my percentage, was like 6% or something like that, and it's moved up from like 5% over the last 10 years or so. How do you, when you're talking about looking ahead 20 years from now, Dale, I know you do a lot of work on boards of directors, and I assume you haven't been involved in it as well. How do you see that changing, and how do you see that influencing the rest of the organization?
Good questions. One is, it is changing, but it's changing slowly. The boardroom has been the most exclusive club in America and in the world today. And what we've seen is a change in the boardroom, albeit slowly, because of growing transparency around institutional shareholders. For example, you look at major corporations and you say, well, who are the top shareholders? Well, TIAA-CREF is a top shareholder, all the major pension funds. And so I tell my aunt, who taught school for 40 years, that her money was invested in major corporations, And that's why she's got this healthy return, which she will not agree with. But what's happening is that institutional shareholders are now saying, and there are institutional shareholder watching groups that are looking at corporations and saying, you must look different. You must look like your consumer group or your employee group. And you must be more inclusive about your business. I'm on a retail board, Kohl's retailer. When I joined that board 3 years ago, there was only one woman on the board. And when you look at the data of female buyers in the marketplace today, it's $1 trillion market. And so when we talk about the customer in retail, it's she, not he. And so retailers today have got to do a much better job of saying, who is my customer? And how do I have people on the board of this company to look like this population? So I think it's growing. I think it will grow further. There's some countries in Europe that have got mandatory requirements around diversity of women on boards. I don't think we'll be at that place in the States. But I do believe that the transparency, because of information today, more people will be raising questions and more institutional shareholder groups will be saying, where are you with respect to this issue of diversity amongst people of women and people of color who represent the marketplace, or people of other lifestyles who would be in the boardroom as well.
At some risk, I'm going to put Howard on the spot here. He led a very interesting discussion, HR Connections, some time ago, and you were talking about sort of cultural differences in Club Med, which is a very global company, obviously, but some cultural differences in how in the training programs you had to acknowledge that in certain cultures, speaking out was less acceptable behavior than in other cultures. Do you recall that conversation?
Of course, absolutely.
Not gonna leave me hanging here. Right? And so cultural,
Especially when we mix them, I think.
Right.
We find classically.
And so you have to avoid being
Exactly. We
stereotypical.
have challenges. Our French culture is very, very outspoken. Intellectual debate is kind of a prized value, if you will. So which can lead itself to what tail chasing and circular discussion. But people who arrive very well prepared and are very articulate and very ready to debate and turn any meeting or training or a conference or a boardroom discussion into a bit of a challenge. And when we bring Hispanic managers into that, they're very overwhelmed by it in many cases. Or high potentials coming out of Mexico and Latin America, and they see it. They're very sensitive to power differentiation in the room and will be very submissive in those environments.
And when I work with executives, I make that point and I say, how inclusive are you being in your words and deeds in this meeting? And I don't think they've ever thought to put a mirror up to their behavior about how it might exclude others or make others feel excluded. You have to explain that. You've got to say, well, when you do this person may not say anything because they don't have the facts and figures or a great argument prepared, or they may not, and you're not opening the door proactively to welcome in. Right. Or it's not appropriate, or maybe hierarchy is really big in their culture, like Asian talent struggles with this so much.
Exactly.
Promoting themselves is like antithetical to the culture, and yet it's so valued and prized in these sort of American business paradigm. So they get looked over for things. Then you find that you don't have any representation, the hierarchy you get. So I think that the ability, the self-knowledge for executives that are not diverse usually, to be proactively welcoming and valuing the input of others and others that may not be as smart at, I don't even know if it's a value judgment around what is esteemed, in a group. Is it smart? Is it intellectual? Is it the school that you went to? Is it, it's all these biases that we bring. And so I think boards have to really look at themselves about how they behave and who they're putting front and center to ask, what do you think? Where do you think this company should go? What a concept.
I agree, but I find it really difficult. And for HR, from the HR perspective, promoting diversity and inclusion in a company where probably your top executives are a walking liability in terms of what's going on.
We're all the attorneys in here.
Yeah, because if they welcome the idea, yes, we should have more X, Y, or Z group, persons from these groups in the company. We should. And then 2 minutes after they mention that, they make a joke or they make a comment that if we shouldn't have more diversity in the room, that will be a real problem or an offense to someone in the room. So, and probably it's because our company is based in South America and it's originally Latin, and probably that's why. But really, we have working liabilities. When they visit the U.S. or when they visit countries where our formalities are more strict, we really have to be very careful on letting them know what they shouldn't.
Well, like the Barilla pasta flap, you know, did everybody follow that? The CEO of Barilla in Italy, the biggest pasta maker,
Yeah, he came out as anti-gay.
on an interview, and it just snowballed. You can read about it, but he made some comments about a traditional family, and we don't care if gay people eat our pasta. If they don't like us, they can go eat somebody else's pasta. The family's run by the woman, and she's our buyer. So, you know, we're about traditional family values. And it was just this moment when you realize this massive group of people. And I think some of us who are younger generations are just sort of hoping these folks will like ride off into the sunset because it's so hard to change. Like, I'll sit there and just tear my hair
There's
out.
some truth in labeling then, right? Heterosexual pasta.
Yeah, sure. They want to go that way, you know, be on the other side of history. I don't know. I mean, it'll work for a while, but
Yeah.
you know, I have some clients whose demographic are 60-year-old white guys, and they're in such danger of not changing soon enough to reflect, like we were talking about, like from the management, the board on down, to the messages they say in the marketplace. And talent is going to go elsewhere. You know, if they don't see themselves reflected in that leadership team, I fear the best talent will go somewhere where they do see they have a career and a future, and they can get mentors and sponsors that look like them. So many women I know have male sponsors, and that's great. That's important, but at some point, the male sponsor, while they can open a lot of doors for the woman, they aren't a senior woman who can say, here's how I did it, and here's how I overcame those challenges. There aren't enough of them. There are no out gay CEOs in the Fortune 500 except for Tim Cook, and he's not out at Apple.
He is now.
He's now, but So what kind of message does it send that he doesn't want to talk about that? He just doesn't want to talk about it. It may not be relevant to him, he's a techie. But on the flip side, I think that how you do and how you show up, your brand as a leader, like I said before, it's going to become very important, that authenticity. I think vulnerability as well. How many people have watched Brené Brown's Vulnerability TED Talk? Anybody love Brené Brown? She gave this talk about how vulnerability is going to be like one of the big leadership competencies.
We can send a link after this maybe.
Yeah, and I think being a person of difference or having a story that puts yourself out there, even though you're an executive, you have a vulnerability. You had something that humanizes you to your workforce, is such a counterintuitive thing for an executive to think, well, why would I open a meeting with that? Why would I tell a personal story? Why would I talk about a mistake I made? You know, and actually it's very powerful. You know, we're all on a journey, and our coaching sort of helps people discover that and then drills them so they tell it in a really powerful way, in a way that actually gains followership and somehow still preserves their ego and, you know, makes them feel comfortable. But it's a real trick. This generation is challenging. And baby boomers, by the way, are staying around much longer in the workforce because of their retirement account was decimated. So the demographics, we thought the Gen Xers would be moving up, and this next generation of thinking and sort of more progressive would move into these leadership roles. But that generation on top of them is massive. It's double the size of Gen X, baby boomers. And they're sticking around years longer. So it's causing this backup in the pipeline, and I think in the ideology that's allowed to flourish to bring these companies forward into the new day. So I think we're kind of delayed. I feel frustrated.
Well,
with that.
it is delayed. Part of it is that McKinsey talks about the war for talent. There's a delay in the gap of the ages and the preparation that people have to come in behind some of the baby boomers. So some of them are staying longer because of the personal financial security needs. Some of them are staying longer because the bench is not strong, because those individuals are not given the opportunity to step up and have more significant opportunities to follow into their footsteps. So you're right. I think there is sort of a prolonged ideology with that group, staying in tow. One of the reasons why I left, I joined Diversified Search is because it's a firm that always
Stood up and said where you came from.
was that Diversified prides itself in creating a diverse slate of candidates for every opportunity. That there's a level of intentionality. Our firm is owned by a woman who started the company 40
What's the
years ago.
distinction about Diversified? It's the largest or the
So
first?
the oldest and largest woman-owned executive search firm in the industry.
Okay.
Yes.
Um,
And
Wow.
so the
Thank
thought is, how do we move beyond conventional wisdom with our clients to help them think much more broadly about the issues of diversity and inclusion in order to, and it's part of our competitive edge with our clients and in the work that we serve. But I believe, though, that as we talk about 10, 20 years out, and say even 10 years out, diversity and inclusion won't have to be sort of an agenda you put at the end of the program. It'll be sort of conscious with this generation, because they think about joining an organization that actually has those values. You think about Tom's Shoes. People buy Tom's Shoes because what Tom's Shoes stands for in terms of giving shoes away to people who don't have shoes. And so I think the next generation is looking at companies that get that, and they have it as a part of their DNA, as opposed to it being forced or that they're trying to transform themselves. They already have it.
Yeah, I noticed an extraordinary difference between my generation and my children's generation, and how they approach these issues. I think they can appreciate it without dwelling on it. It's just a different mindset. They're just so more accustomed to being in a multicultural, diverse, racially ethnic, sexual preference environment. It's just not as big a deal.
And by the way, they're more multicultural, multiracial,
Right,
and multisexuality too.
Right.
So the tracking question is so interesting. Like if we think about the affirmative action, which is where a lot of traditional diversity efforts has come from, measured people based on race and ethnicity. But as these things become more fluid, it's so interesting to think, what will diversity really mean to all of us? Because we are becoming multi-people, in terms of identity. And by the way, younger people also don't want to be put in a bucket. So they're chafing against too. Like I have young women say, I wouldn't call myself a feminist, or I would never join the women's network at my company. I want to be judged on my performance. And it's so interesting to me, because I think to myself, the work is not done. We need you to be a part of that. We need you to understand that, that this is something that's going to take a lot of proactive energy. But that's me kind of making the societal, argument. That they're in this very selfish young period in their lives, and they're like, I don't know if I want to be called out as an African American. Or young people say queer instead of lesbian or gay. They're playing with the terms. So as this comes, and then by the way, I'll give you another thing that'll make your head hurt. I work with a lot of Fortune 50 companies, and a lot of them have this thing called allies that's starting to happen, which is allies to people of diversity. So I'm an ally to the lesbian and gay community. I'm a straight person that's very hip to, wanting to make this environment a more welcoming place. There can be male allies for women professionals as well, who are really, like I said, that CEO with the daughter. I would call him an ally to say, I am proactive. Ask me to do things and I will do things. I will work hard. I will put my social capital on the line as an ally to make a change. So allies are, all of a sudden, traditionally we had diversity groups in corporate America, but the allies are starting to just rush in and join all the diversity groups. The LGBT networks, like Target's network in Minneapolis, and working with them, 80% allies and 20% LGBT people in the LGBT group. All these heterosexual people saying, what can I do to help? And it's this younger generation too who are saying, I don't like what I'm seeing in this company. I'm a straight, young, white kid, male, and I look at the leadership team and I'm not okay with it. Even though I look like them, I don't think that doesn't resonate to me, because that's not, my mom worked. My mom was a successful career woman. Why are there no women on the board? And then they say, well, I don't know if this company gets me and what my values are. So super fascinating what's happening. And I think these employee resource groups, I can talk to anybody offline that wants to know more about them, but there are thousands of employees strong in a lot of these companies, thousands of women in Cisco's women's network, and they're on the move. They're definitely pushing change within the companies. It's very exciting.
Yes. And again, go back to Latin America, though, it's a different, you want to say something?
one of the biggest surprises, and I even see it as a barrier for us, has been that the women leaders of our company, for so many cases I can think of, are not the biggest advocates for the promotion or advancement of women in our organization. And if anything, are resistant. I don't know how many times I've chatted with female executives. I really like working with men. I like to surround myself with male managers.
I was about to comment the same.
And I'm like, well, if you're not going to be an advocate for this, who will be, and how did you get here?
Right, exactly.
I just dumbfounded.
Want to weigh in on why that is? I have some theories.
Women are
Just something to add to that.
Yeah.
It's like they try to emulate or become their mate
the male
in
environment
order to
they're in.
get there.
Yeah.
So once they get there,
Yeah.
they don't care anymore.
They pull the ladder up behind them.
Exactly.
Not be pigeonholed.
This is the part where we go into psychoanalysis.
Yeah, this is deep stuff, you guys. I don't know if you want to go there. Look, there's a couple things. So, look, I fought so hard to get here. I had to earn it. You have to earn it, right? That's one thing I hear. Another thing is, honestly, women executives have a lot of battle scars. I mean, it is really, really tough. As a diverse person, period, person of color, being the only one in the room for years and years and years, suspecting that you're getting passed over for things, not really knowing the power dynamics or the rule book that nobody shared with you. So you're there and you feel that you're tenuously holding on to this position that nobody else has gotten to before. So your first impulse is not to turn around and be extra generous. For some people it is. I love them. They're great. But for a lot of people, it's like I'm so exhausted from the battle and I'm trying so hard to hold on. I don't have anything left. You can't get blood from a stone. It's like, and so I have a lot of human feelings for these folks that are the only, because it's exhausting. And so there are some, however, that somehow in their busy schedule have time to give back. And I think you have to find those in your organization. And I see it as the bell curve. Honestly, it's the top, 10% that you may find who are they don't want anybody to repeat the experience that they had. They don't want anyone else in the younger generation to feel like that coming through. So they're going to reach down and help. But they're not everyone. And I'm not sure you can really make them or force them to be. If they have a mentality like I earned it, you've got to earn it. I think I see that's pervasive actually with all generations or genders. It's like, I could never ask for what I wanted, therefore you shouldn't be able to ask for what you want. And I hear that a lot when we talk about generational diversity. How dare they ask for XYZ? How dare they, that's not the way that we are set up.
Yeah.
But I think that's like missing the point. I think the new generation is an exciting opportunity for us to reinvent our organizations, to really listen to them. And as a Gen Xer, I wish I'd been listened to, but I just don't think the time was right. And my generation did not have the size and the sheer power to come in and kind of create this wave of change in the organization. So we sort of had to toe the line, we had to keep our head down, we had to get along with everybody on either side, but it's sort of like the missed opportunity. It's a little bittersweet, I think, for a lot of us that are my age. But anyway, I could go on here.
I would just echo that. I think that the dynamic is more of an exception rather than a rule, in the sense is that people who come from sort of traditional disenfranchised groups tend to want to be helpful to others. But I think there are exceptions where people say, you know what, I've done my deal, I'm on, I'm not going to do that. And then there's some people who feel that it's a sense of entitlement to be trying to bring somebody else up. But I think that's more the exception rather than the rule in terms of what I've seen. I do believe, though, diversity inclusion conversations will be so different because the world is changing so rapidly, and that all of a sudden we'll wake up and realize that Amway, which was the sleeper company in Grand Rapids, who happens to be my client, by the way, will wake up and realize that all of their revenue, 95%, 96%, is from outside the U.S., and they got to figure out how do they become a more inclusive company. More and more revenue streams are coming from outside the U.S., and we're looking at the growth markets. We know all the growth markets are in the emerging markets. Africa's coming on, Ethiopia is coming on as a country in East Africa, growing market. Someday there'll be 11 million Cubans when Cuba comes along, and the Castro and his brother die out, the regime dies out, and the world will be different. As this city's different. John and I were talking about Miami. Miami's a different city than most of us knew Miami 25, 30 years ago, and it just happened. And so the conversation isn't so unusual. as we talk about diversity and inclusion today, and we talk about gender preferences or people with disabilities. That the workplace has changed with people with disabilities. Sodexo today looks at its plant in Chile, and they realize they've got a growing number of people with disabilities who have a greater loyalty to the company, a lower absentee rate, and are really helping the folks in Sodexo, Chile, understand how do people with difficulties, physical difficulties, overcome and be good at what they do. And so I think we're going to see a lot of transformation around with people with disabilities in the workplace
I agree.
as never before.
Cisco is one of our clients, and their disabilities employee network advises their product development team. Because if you think about the virtual world we're all going to work in the future, the flex and the remote worker, we're enabled by technology. That's our connection point. So it's got to work for a diversity of people. Hearing impaired, sight impaired, 24/7 whenever you just get the work done, it doesn't matter when. So, but the point is that internal employee network, I love that they're using their personal experience to say, hey Cisco, here's what we need to build in, so that we could enable all kinds of remote workers to make a contribution. And I think that's a powerful value, a full-scale value chain there that I just think is really cool.
Well, you got employers saying, "Hey, I've got somebody here in a wheelchair who's partially blind, and you're at home with a cold." So
Yeah.
help me understand your commitment to being here today. And so all of a sudden, you've got a growing group of people who overcome so much to be here in the workplace today. Because that now raised the bar around what other people who come to work ought to be thinking about.
How many think you've missed an opportunity at some point in your life because of who you are, by race, by sex, by sexual preference, by anything? How many think in this room think they've somehow not gotten a break they should have because of who they are? Not that many. How many think you've gotten a break because of who you are? Flip side, how many think you've gotten a break because of who you are? So most of you think you have risen and fallen on your own merits, right?
No, or some of us just don't know. I don't know when I didn't get the deal.
Yeah, I wouldn't turn around and raise your hands on either of those questions.
So, but I think that's the case for some of us here today. Is sometimes we just don't know.
How many of you assume I've gotten a break because of who I am? Is what I would. Seriously, how many think that, right? As a white guy, you think I've had some advantages, right? Probably, right? Yeah, but you don't know sometimes,
You
right?
don't know, yeah. And so it may have happened along the journey because somebody says, "I want to give you a break," or you may not have gotten something because of skin color or language or ethnicity. Sometimes it isn't clear. Now you can let that define you and keep you from getting to the next stage, and so that's a whole other conversation.
And the executive level, the golf club together, the families, and I still hear people say, well, the wives will go off and do this, and the men will meet. I mean, this is still said at like Fortune 50 companies, and it's not inclusive language. So that's a very tangible.
Most of those men, by the way, are terrible golfers.
And they'd rather be at the spa. And it just makes a lot of assumptions. So I think even just simple things like in our everyday language that executives can use when they're thinking about who is on the team and the deals that happen outside of the meeting room, and the opportunities and the doors that you open because you know somebody's family, you've known them for a long time, you went to the same school. All of that, I think the raising of the consciousness around that is really the work that has to be done, so that people are intentional to say, no, I'm not going to have that meeting without that person here. I've heard stories of, well, a woman saying, I wasn't invited to that meeting after hours because the assumption was made that I needed to be home with my kids. And the woman's trying to build a career. So there's little tiny assumptions that are made constantly that may exclude, and these are sort of what we call micro inequities. They're not conscious and they aren't so harmless, and yet when you look at them in a different way, they are harmful to sort of non-traditional talent who's trying to get in. So we have to work with our executives to listen to their language, and as HR people, ask some questions about that. Notice it, bring it up, do some coaching.
I would imagine it's very difficult particularly in Miami, with companies multinationals, for women with young children to advance when there's an enormous travel schedule. It makes it particularly challenging.
Yeah.
Not if you have a nanny. That's the solution.
That's the solution.
Seriously, that's the solution.
Yeah. we pretty much used up our time here. I think, are they ready for us with lunch over there, or should I let them know we're gonna come over?
It's looking good over
Is
there.
it ready for us? Anybody not want to go eat lunch? So I want to thank Jennifer and Dale for being here.